Welcome to the Miller Report. I'm Suzanne Miller, CEO of Empire State Properties and host of the Miller Report. Today's guest, like so many other people on the show, was born in New York City, the Bronx. She grew up in a rural area of North Carolina and now represents North Carolina's 5th District in the United States Congress. She's been a teacher, a college president, and in government both on the state and federal level. She is the chairwoman of the House Committee of Education and Workforce. Welcome, Congresswoman Virginia Foxx, to the Miller Report.
I'm excited to be with you, Suzanne.
Thank
Very
you.
excited.
Yeah, we waited a while to get you on, and I think it was worth the wait. And it was such an honor to meet you with Andy Sabin in New York and discuss what's going on in the university, specifically the rise of anti-Semitism. You really caught my eye, and I'm such a supporter, and thank you. Thanks for doing what you do. Before we go on, I want to ask you, so our audience could understand who you are. You've done so much to fight anti-Semitism, and you're not even Jewish. Where does this passion come from, Dr. Foxx?
Well, first of all, Suzanne, I really appreciate your inviting me to be on your show. It's an honor for me to be with you. I actually was born in Manhattan. I know Wikipedia says the Bronx, but I was born on East 114th Street between 2nd and 3rd Avenue. I was actually baptized in Mount Carmel Catholic Church, which is a very famous church in New York, I know. And I love my Italian roots. My grandparents came from Italy, and my father was born there. My mother was from Western North Carolina. She was there working during the war. So that's my background. And we did meet through Andy Sabin, a wonderful philanthropist who lives in New York and on Long Island. So, Suzanne, I was brought up by my parents to believe and understand that all people should be treated equally. No one should be discriminated against. And, in the little neighborhood where we lived in New York, it was very mixed neighborhood. There were Jewish people, Polish people, Irish people, Italian people. So my family grew up in a neighborhood like that. Then in North Carolina, of course, there are not very many Jewish people. But again, I'm a believer in treating people equally. All people are of value. I was baptized as Catholic, but in North Carolina, there weren't very many Catholics in those days. So I went to a Baptist church, and I grew up understanding that the Jews are God's chosen people. And in Genesis, it says, if you bless my people, you will be blessed. If you curse my people, you will be cursed. And so I just have a natural inclination to treat people right. I don't think you have to be Jewish to believe in treating the Jewish people right, and to know that what has happened to the Jewish people over the centuries has been wrong. Now, the Bible foretold it. And again, for those of us who grew up in Protestant churches where we learned a lot, I'm now back in the Catholic Church as an adult, went back, but I'm certainly glad I grew up learning the Bible.
That's great. Thank you so much for what you do. So, Dr. Foxx, what do you believe is the root cause of the horrific rise in anti-Semitism that we see today? What is the cause?
Well, it's very interesting that all these riots broke out on these college campuses on October 8th, the day after this Hamas slaughter of innocent Jews in Israel. It's so curious that happened, because it's clear that there was something going on those campuses before that, Suzanne.
Interesting.
There were people there fomenting anti-Semitism. And when the horrible thing happened on October 7th, suddenly they came out of their holes, so to speak, and started demonstrating against Jewish people and professing their anti-Semitism. So I believe that a lot of it has come from the campuses. I just finished reading Christopher Rufo's book, called the America's Cultural Revolution. And you might want to ask Christopher Rufo sometime to come on your podcast because he outlines it. The book is great. I recommend it to people. He outlines how this started in the 1960s with dissidents on the campus, students then who became faculty, who then injected their poison into the studies in the universities. And I believe that is where much of it has come from. We also know that places like Qatar, Saudi Arabia have been funding programs on these campuses, which also has been adding to the anti-Semitism sentiment. Now, under Betsy DeVos and President Trump, we were enforcing the law about the universities having to tell where the foreign money was coming from. But the universities were not doing that. And so Secretary DeVos, President Trump said, you've got to start doing it. They uncovered money, but there's a lot more money that's been coming into those universities, and it's coming from malign sources, which they're funding anti-Semitic professors, anti-Semitic student groups, all kinds of anti-Semitic groups that are coming forth now. They've been sort of lying in wait. Also in the universities, they've fostered DEI. That's where that all came from. But so they're all a part of the same movement.
So why have the universities been so effectless about stopping this? I mean, they're getting federal funding. I think they're getting international funding. I think George Soros has given, as I read, $50 million just to Harvard. Is this correct? Am I reading this correctly?
I don't know that specific figure about George Soros and Harvard. I would not be surprised. I just have not seen that specific figure. Mm-hmm. But the reason we had our hearing on December 5th with the presidents of Harvard, UPenn, and MIT was to answer the very question you just asked. Why aren't those leaders at the universities doing something about this? We will be bringing the president of Columbia University in for a hearing week after next to ask exactly the same question, because those campuses and others, we have written to Rutgers, we've written to Berkeley, UC Berkeley. We will be writing to other campuses as we read reports of these anti-Semitic demonstrations, and we hear from parents. I got just a heart-rending letter from a parent the other day about how her child is scared to death to be on the campus at Cornell. And we've heard the stories about Cornell, and we're going to be looking into all of these universities. But the answers we got from those presidents on December 5th were not appropriate. They are not taking this seriously. They're not protecting the students.
Are these universities even paying taxes on the money they receive?
No, they're not. They're all nonprofits. Now, we did start, again, under President Trump, I think a very smart move of taxing the largest 50 endowments, because these universities have billions of dollars in their endowments, and yet they come to the taxpayer to pay for financial aid and to pay for other activities on their campuses. So we think it's important that they pay on their taxes on their endowment. It's a small amount. I would make them pay a lot higher rate. If the Lord put me in charge, I'd do a lot different things.
Well, I'm going to put you in charge. I'm not the law. But just to circle back and finish this. So we all understand the First Amendment provides the right of speech, free speech. But how do we draw the line between the free speech and the dangerous hate speech with these universities? What can we do?
Well, we've just introduced a bill, a free speech bill out of our committee. This is something we're working on. Suzanne, I am really honored to be the chairwoman of the Education and Workforce Committee. And as you mentioned in your comments, I was a college president, a college administrator. I was even on the school board for 12 years. So I'm working on all of these issues on our committee, and we're bringing forth various bills to deal with the issues. We've already passed out of the House the Deterrent Act, which is to make sure the universities report the money they're getting from these foreign governments, even down to any individual professor. That hasn't been a part of the law. So we've introduced a bill to hold the colleges accountable, the College Cost Reduction Act, for the money that they get and for the loans that the students take out. Now we've introduced a free speech bill, and we'll be doing more legislation. We'll be introducing more. We'll hope that we can get the Senate to pass some of these pieces of legislation. But of course, you know that it's controlled by very liberal people, and it will be very hard to do that. But we're putting our markers down, Suzanne, and we want the American people to see what would Republicans do if Republicans had the majority in the Senate and President Trump were president.
Amazing. Let's move on to three important issues that we need to address on the federal level, because we just talked about the federal government: the border, the conflict in Gaza, and Ukraine. And we'll just briefly touch on these things because this is what you do daily. I'd like to get your thoughts on what Congress's role should be in all of these areas and how we can work together as a country, okay? So are you in agreement that the recent immigration bill written by James Lanford, who's a Republican, and Chris Murphy, who's a Democrat, should not be brought to the House for a vote?
We don't, pardon me. I like Jim Lankford a lot. James Lankford, excuse me. He goes by James. James Lankford.
Okay.
I love James Lankford. He's a wonderful human being. But we don't need that legislation. The president can shut the border down at any time that he wants to. It's already in legislation. He can turn back any individual that he wants to. President Trump didn't need new legislation. President Trump had the border shut down. So we don't need that. We sent to the House last May H.R. 2, which would have done a lot of reforms related to border and immigration. But we do not need new legislation from the Senate. We need the Senate to pass H.R. 2, which we sent to them last year. They've had the bill almost a year.
So everybody knows, no matter what side you're on, that the border is a disaster and we haven't had an immigration policy in 20 years. We could all agree, and it keeps me up at night. But some people think that both parties are actually using this as a political leverage rather than working together, which will pass the law. I mean, so what's your thoughts about that?
I think the Democrats are using it as a political tool. Again, we passed H.R. 2, which was a very strong border bill and would have changed a lot of our immigration laws. Listen, Suzanne, I was in Congress in 2005, 2006. We passed a bill in 2006 to build the wall. We started building the wall in 2006. Then Republicans lost the majority. Nancy Pelosi came in as Speaker in 2009, and she stopped building the wall. Republicans are sincere about closing down the border. We've passed bill after bill after bill, but we've never had the two houses of Congress and the presidency at the same time for a period of time to be able to do it. So we're not using it as a political tool, but the Democrats are.
Well, hopefully that will change. Let's move on to the Middle East. We can all agree that Israel, and thank you, is our strongest ally in the region, but they're defending themselves. They're losing a PR war. How can they win this PR battle while the United States continues to support them?
Well, I'm not sure how they can win the PR battle because the press is always against Israel. Mm-hmm. We know that, you know that. But what Israel has to do is destroy Hamas down to the last person. That is the only way the Israelis can be safe. I support Israel doing that. We would not tolerate what Israel has tolerated over the years. Thousands of rockets coming in every day, people having to run to bomb shelters. No Americans would have put up with that. And we should not be second guessing Israel and what it's doing. Israel has a right to defend itself. You know, one of the things I learned when I went to Israel, Suzanne, and I think it's something you might want to talk about more. I had a real epiphany when I was there on one issue. I was listening to a security briefing and they were talking about the IDF. You know, Israel doesn't have an army. Israel has the Israeli Defense Force. All Israel ever does is defend
That
itself.
small little country.
A small little country buffeted on all sides by their enemies. Again, Americans would not put up with that for a second. And we should not ask Israel to do the same thing. Hamas needs to be wiped out. Israel needs to have its own safe borders. And where they've built the walls, they've had safety. And so I support the Israeli government and I support what it's doing.
So what's your take on Chuck Schumer's recent comments?
Chuck Schumer should take care of his own business.
Okay, we'll move on from that one. So what do you about Donald Trump? I mean, his last comment about Israel wrapping things up quickly. What do you think he's going to do differently?
Well, President Trump recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
He brought forth the Abraham Accords. He's been very pro-Israel. And I think if President Trump had been president, I don't think that many of the things that have happened in this world, such as the invasion by Hamas, would have occurred. I just don't think that would have happened.
Do you think he'll have the same strong opinion about protecting Israel as he did when he was formerly president?
I certainly hope so, and I see no reason why he wouldn't.
Okay. Let's move on to Ukraine. What role do you think the United States should have there?
Well, where I think we have gone wrong on the Ukraine issue is where President Biden again is at fault. When Russia invaded Ukraine, Ukraine asked for certain armaments, and President Biden dilly-dallied about it and didn't give them what they wanted. Had he given Ukraine what it needed at the very beginning, I think that war would have been over very, very quickly. The Ukrainians are like Americans during the Revolutionary War. They're the bravest, most selfless people in the world fighting Russia, who is so much larger than they are. And so I think that President Biden should get off of his duff, give them everything that they need, and let them fight back against Ukraine. The president had the power to do that, whether the Congress does anything or not. He keeps wanting to shift the blame us on immigration, blame us on everything, and take no responsibility. Have you ever heard a Democrat take any responsibility for anything? They never do. They always try to shift the blame.
I haven't seen any Democratic cities do well, so we could just go back to that. But let's stay on Ukraine. Do you think NATO is a viable deterrent without the United States involvement?
I think we have propped up the NATO way too long. Mm-hmm. I think President Trump was wise to force NATO countries to say, look, you've got to pay what you promised to pay. Now, we want a free Europe. We don't want Russia. We don't want another world war. We don't want World War II. We don't want World War III. That's right. We don't want another World War II in a World War III. We don't want Russia or China or any other country to march over other countries. They should, again, mind their own business, stay in their territory, and everybody can be at peace.
Do you think Russia's going to keep going if they're successful in Ukraine? Is this really going to be World War III? Is that what you see?
Well, I don't want to say it's going to be World War III, but I don't think Russia will stop. Putin is insatiable. He said the greatest negative thing that happened in the 20th century was the breakup of the Soviet Union. And so he wants to put back the Soviet Union. The people are in former Soviet Union states don't want that. And you can see now even Finland, Switzerland, Sweden, not Switzerland, Sweden and Finland have come into NATO because they want the protection of NATO. They're afraid of Putin.
I know they are. I have a friend in Italy telling me that they're preparing for war. So we have to take this very serious. We need strong leadership. I think that
I was in Finland and Norway several years, not too long ago, and they are scared to death of Putin.
they are. So, Dr. Foxx, I thank you so much for this. I know it's short, but we got right down to the points. I think I agree with so much that you're saying, and I know that you recently defeated your Republican opponent in the last primary, and you're going to be up for re-election in November. So
Correct.
tell our listeners at the Miller Report, we know what you stand for, but I think we're at 2 million views here now, so I want you loud and clear why we need to support you, and this is your platform.
Well, thank you very much. I didn't know I was going to get to give an elevator speech.
Yes, I want an elevator speech.
You got to give an elevator speech. Well, Suzanne, I'm a very humble person. I grew up very poor, but I had a lot of opportunities growing up. I grew up in the 50s, the best time in the world to have grown up anywhere in the world, but particularly in rural North Carolina. I worked hard. I had a chance to get an education. I've continued to work hard. And my goal is to preserve the opportunities that I've had in my life to be successful for people who come behind me. You know, I have 3 degrees because I've always loved the academic world. I've loved learning. But all I want for people is to be successful, be happy, and to have a fruitful life. That doesn't mean you have to have a degree. Whatever your passion is in our country, if you develop your skills and you work hard, you can be successful. And that's what I'm working to preserve. I'm working to preserve life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You know, I once told a group of students, you don't sit on your behind and have happiness put in your lap. The words in the Declaration are, we are due life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So I want to preserve that opportunity for everybody in our country.
And safety.
And safety.
And safety,
That's
because
exactly
that is what
right.
you stand for, and with everything
right.
that you've told us here in the Miller Report about Israel, about Ukraine, about all you do to uncover where the money is coming from on the college campuses, that's fantastic. And I really hope
those Jewish students, the campus has the obligation to keep them safe. And our governments, that's why we form governments, is to keep us safe, Suzanne, not to take our money, but to keep us safe.
Well, please keep us advised of anything that you uncover. We want to get this out. We want to keep going. We want to make our universities accountable for what they are doing and where they're getting their money from, because this is still the greatest country in the world. So thank you so much for coming.
Believe that.
I know
Good.
you do.
Watch our hearing on Columbia. And Suzanne, I'm going to send you something from Martin Niemöller, who talked about, when you asked me earlier why I believe so much in this, I'm going to send you a piece you can use sometime.
That'll be great. Thank you so much for coming on the Miller
Thank
Report,
you.
Dr. Foxx, and we look forward to more.